Hello there. You're back with at FearNothing-QuestionEverything for our 4th episode of Putting the Truth Back into True Crime. In this episode, we're going to discuss everything that makes me believe Bryan Kohberger is innocent of these crimes. This might be long. Buckle up, sit back and enjoy. Like and subscribe, all support's appreciated as always, and let's do it. Before I proceed, I'm going to introduce you to Bryan. Not the Bryan Kohberger that Moscow PD want you to hate and the media, the real Bryan Kohberger. At the end of this, you can make up your own mind on whether or not you believe he was some incel predator or just a guy who poked his nose in where it shouldn't belong. Bryan grew up in Pennsylvania with his parents and 2 siblings. He attended Pleasant Valley High School. Bryan wasn't like other kids. He grew up with undiagnosed autism, ADHD and OCD. Like many undiagnosed neurodivergent individuals, he found a way to self-medicate. Unfortunately for Bryan, this started an opiate addiction. This was around the time in his life when he committed his first crime. In 2014, he stole his sister's iPhone to get money for his newfound habit. His family reported him to the police. Also around about this period of time, one of his friends' iPads went missing. The parents suspected that it was Bryan, although it was never confirmed. Despite struggling with addiction, Bryan got a job as a security for the Pleasant Valley School District. Here he helped save a woman's life as she suffered from a life-threatening asthma attack. Despite everything, Bryan's family still loved and cared about him. He wasn't a loner, as he had friends and associates. He was just neurodivergent. His parents either went bankrupt or almost went bankrupt trying to help him recover from his addiction. They were willing to do whatever it took. Unlike many, Bryan succeeded in getting clean. He had the opportunity to turn his life around and he took it. This is when he went back to college. In 2018, Bryan attended Northampton Community College where he earned his Associate of Arts degree in psychology. Only someone who's lived with an undiagnosed neurodivergence will understand how much of an accomplishment that is. Especially as well after battling addiction. He had managed to turn his life around. From there he went to Washington SU to get his PhD in criminology. In between, this will be relevant later, Bryan took courses in cloud-based forensics, etc. In July of 2022, he packed up and moved states to further his education and attend Washington State University. Bryan was what you consider an older student, so he struggled to fit in. Once again, he'd made several attempts to socialise with others, but Bryan was socially awkward, as are many who are neurodivergent. Largely, he kept himself to himself. He loved being in nature and struggled to sleep. His coping mechanisms were going for long hikes, drives. Since his schedule had gotten busier due to working as a teaching assistant and studying full-time, he turned his hikes into nighttime drives. Wabi Park became a favourite of his. On Bryan's phone there were multiple photos of the night, early morning sky from Wabi Park, from July up until November. You see, the thing is, for many, driving around at night may seem strange, but for Bryan, someone who had battled addiction and had more mental health battles than any of us can imagine, it was completely normal. It was something he'd done regularly. The irony is, when going into dark places without a phone signal at night, the only person who was putting in any danger was himself. Fast forward to the night of the 12th of November, Bryan was at home when a hit and run happened right outside of his apartment complex. The police presence outside his home grew, and they cordoned one of the entry points to his apartment complex off with police tape. A large police presence remained at his area until 1 p.m. the following day, the 13th. Seeing what was going on outside, Bryan turned it on and started listening to the police scanner online. A while later, obviously still awake and unable to sleep, Bryan decided to go a drive to clear his head and obviously tried to get a look at the crime scene outside his home. Wouldn't we all? From there, Bryan travels towards Wabi Park. En route, there are many areas lacking cell service and Bryan's phone disconnected from the network, automatically triggering his VPN kill switch and disabling all network connections to his phone. Depending on settings, those would not connect again until there was a strong enough connection to the tunnel. Do not quote me, this is what I understand from my research into the topic and it could very well be wrong. Either way, his phone could have been disconnected from the cell towers and not switched off at all. However, here's the nitty-gritty part of my research and I'll try and make this make as much sense as possible. Bryan leaves his apartment at 2:42. Moscow PD claims his phone disconnects 5 minutes later at 2:47. Although the defence expert had his phone active and connected for a further 7 minutes, which would mean it disconnected at 2:54. Here's a few things to note. If you're travelling at 35 miles per hour, you can travel 4.8 miles in 7 minutes. That obviously means you can travel 8 miles in 14 minutes. This will be important. It's also important to note that in Idaho, at the time of the crimes, there were 20,000 white Elantras. There were 90 registered to park at the University of Idaho. I'll continue into the movements of the white car. When Bryan left his apartment at 2:42, the next time a white vehicle was seen in any CCTV footage was at Floyd's cannabis shop, which was 13 minutes from Bryan's apartment. Now, Bryan's ETA at Floyd's cannabis shop should have been 2:55 a.m. The white car seen in the footage was at 3:02 a.m. Now, that's a 7-minute discrepancy or a 4-mile discrepancy, whatever way you want to look at it. It might not seem a lot, but it matters. If they can't tell us where Bryan was or what he was doing in that 7 minutes, how can they be sure that that's his vehicle at all? The next time a white vehicle is pictured in any footage is at Indian Hills Drive in Moscow. It's seen at 3:25 a.m. Indian Hills Drive is a 21-minute drive from Bryan's apartment. So if he drove there straight to Indian Hills Drive, his ETA should have been 3:03 a.m. But there's a discrepancy of 22 minutes, or 12 whole miles. Now let's look at it another way. The drive from Floyd's to Indian Hills Drive is 9 minutes. So if the white car that's seen at Indian Hills Drive was the same car from Floyd's cannabis shop, then its arrival time should have been 3:11 a.m. So that's a further discrepancy of 14 minutes, or 8 miles. I don't believe that the vehicle seen at Floyd's cannabis shop is the same vehicle that left Bryan's apartment. And I don't even believe that the vehicle seen at passing Floyd's cannabis shop is the same vehicle that was then witnessed at Indian Hills Drive. There's nothing to suggest that it is. The timing's off. From then on, the white vehicle seen at Indian Hills Drive, at all times, the CCTV footage match up and the times of the journey. So if a journey was to take 2 minutes, it would only take 2 minutes. If it was 3, it would be 3. So the vehicles seen at Sunset Ridge Road and Paradise Drive, and all the times are completely consistent. The same can't be said about the vehicle seen at Floyd's cannabis shop or Bryan's. When Bryan's phone connects, it connects to a cell tower that's described as south of Moscow, north of Genesee, and then goes towards Uniontown, and then north on the US 195 to Pullman. What if I told you that the same cell tower that you would connect to that covers the US 95 from Wowawi Park also covers Blaine, south of Idaho, north of Genesee, Uniontown, and the same road Bryan would need to drive to get home from Wowawi Park area? Moscow PD believe Bryan took the long route home and decided to drive for an hour and 10 minutes, covered in blood and with evidence of a quadruple homicide in his car, rather than the 19-20 minute journey to drive straight home. They're also failing to account for the entire Pullman PD being outside of his apartment when he returned home from his apparent killing spree. Also, Moscow PD claim they have cell tower data that proves Bryan's whereabouts. Yes, and the data that you have puts him exactly where he says he was. Bryan's phone never pinged in Moscow that night, never pinged anywhere near Moscow that night. The last time Bryan's phone pinged was in Pullman. It's also really important to note that he never claims to be stargazing in his alibi. The media read the word and ran with it. He stated he went out a drive and that there was proof of this, and stargazing was something he done regularly, as there was photos of the night sky from previous nights, early mornings, as proof of that. There is also a possibility that during that time, Bryan's phone may have connected to 1 or 2 towers, and this could have been proven had Moscow PD provided the cell tower data, but they only provided 18% of the cell tower data for the area to the defence when they were mapping Bryan's movements. The state claimed they don't have access to that data. The defence expert argued that it was impossible for them to have made such a report without it, and that it is something they'd have received in the warrant. He stated point blank that they were withholding it. Judge Hippler called him a conspiracy theorist and refused to let him testify to that in court. There's also the fact that Bryan studied cloud-based forensics. As someone who hasn't studied cloud-based forensics, if I intended on committing a crime, I would leave my phone at home and YouTube on autoplay. But Bryan did study cloud-based forensics. Do you think he thought that turning his phone off en route would provide an alibi? He knows it wouldn't. I'll make a separate video going into depth about the bias the courts displayed in this case and how it was better for Bryan to ask for a plea than to follow through with a trial. However, I'll continue in this where I'm going just now. Let's talk about the crime scene. It's statistically impossible to kill 4 people in such a manner and in that time frame without leaving either traces of yourself at the scene and on the victims, or without taking any of it with you. It would take meticulous planning and a forethought to even consider the possibility. Even then, it is highly unlikely. For talking's sake, let's say he did. Let's indulge the state's theory. In their theory, they tell us that Bryan was killing Zena at 4:18 am. His car fled the scene 2 minutes later. Now, even if you did manage to kill 4 people and had wore protection or protective equipment that offered enough protection to not contaminate anything, it will not stop the crime scene from contaminating you. Aside from Bryan being a vegan and it making absolutely no sense that he would participate in a bloodbath, 2 minutes is not enough time to remove all evidence of the crimes from yourself in order to not leave any trace in the car. Not even a single dog hair or spot of blood anywhere. That's also a statistical impossibility. Especially someone so complacent as to leave a sheath there after touching it without gloves. However, like I mentioned earlier, it's a statistical impossibility that anyone could commit those crimes without transferring their DNA, and I was correct. They didn't. There was unknown DNA found under multiple victims' fingernails. There was blood found on the wall from an unknown male, on the handrail on the ground floor. There was blood in a right-hand glove in the driveway, blood in a cigarette butt in the backyard. There was blood in a face print on the kitchen window, and there was unknown DNA on the sheath. They didn't not leave DNA. The murderers left lots of DNA. It's just that the murderer wasn't Bryan Kohberger. Bryan Kohberger's DNA did not match any of them anywhere. The only thing that Moscow PD can prove is that Bryan Kohberger touched a sheath, or he touched someone who touched a sheath, or just maybe the touch DNA wasn't reliable enough, or maybe the lawyer who emailed a tip into Pullman PD saying that Bryan knives was stolen was telling the truth. In the email, a lawyer contacted Pullman PD and told them that Moscow PD Chief James Fry had a relative who was the residence manager at WSU, Andy Fry. He said that Bryan was close to solving a crime on WSU campus, and because of this, he believed Andy gained access to Bryan's apartment and stole his knife and sheath. When the knife was bought, it was bought with a tyre repair kit, bear spray, vegan gums, etc. All of those items were found in either Bryan's car or Bryan's apartment. Bryan has never denied owning a knife and sheath. He has, however, always maintained that his was planted at the scene. What's strange is that not long after the crimes, Andy left Washington State University and James Fry retired. Coincidence? I don't really believe in coincidence. Then there's the aforethought. Bryan was a 28-year-old man. Like most of us, he had social media accounts and relied on it for different things, like to share his emotions, ask questions in forums, or use it for research purposes during studies. Now, anyone who uses social media in such a way, we know for a fact that you can end up on your friends, aunties, dogs' Instagram for absolutely no good reason. We've all stalked their ex or their new partner. Maybe I'm outing myself, but the real ones will know. Bryan Kohberger has no connection to any of the victims. Law enforcement analysed over 53 devices and found not a single link to Bryan Kohberger in any of the victims. And remember, even if Bryan knew how to remove all trace from his own device, which he'll know is highly unlikely with today's technology, he wouldn't have been able to remove it from the victims' devices. He hadn't reached out to anyone. And even if he removed it from his device, Meta stores their own data. They know what Bryan searched for. They know who he searched for. They know who he followed. He had no links to any of the victims in 1122 King Road that night. He didn't Google how to stop blood from contaminating a car. He didn't buy overalls and commercial grade gloves like Coy. I have a short about him, if you want to go and watch that. So there's no history of him ordering cleaning chemicals online. and no footage of him doing so anywhere else either before or after the crimes. They searched his entire car, his entire apartment and his office. He had no trace of the victims anywhere. He hadn't even emptied his Hoover. And the knife that he tried to buy on Amazon after the crimes, that's fabricated. Amazon stores its buy again. People also bought and suggested data as click data in order for them to be paid for their ads. So there is no proof that Bryan personally clicked on a Kabar or a sheaf after the crimes. Only that one was suggested to him somewhere while browsing on Amazon, and it's really important to note he didn't buy one. He probably didn't even notice his was gone, and also he bought it on his computer that he shared with his parents at his home, so it was probably not even him that was getting the ad. Anyway, believe it or not, this is the shortened version. The reality is that Moscow PD have no motive, no weapon, no connection, and no evidence connecting Bryan Kohberger to these crimes or the crimes to him. All they can prove is that Bryan, one time, touched a sheath. He has no criminal history, no prior knowledge of violence. They can't prove that the sheath was ever at the crime scene or that the knife was the one that killed them because they've never been able to locate it. The only image they've ever provided of the sheath was in the lab. They've never released a photo of the knife sheath at the scene of the crimes, not once. It would have had to remain in place after the bodies were removed in order for proper processing of the scene, so there's no reason as to why they can't provide the photograph. The sheath had no blood on it, and it must have been in an area where it wasn't soaked in blood, so it shouldn't have been an issue to take a photo and release it at the scene. They've no DNA matching Bryan's at the scene besides trace touch DNA. In a quadruple homicide, when we have multiple unknown male blood sources and unknown male DNA under the victim's fingernails, that you would focus only on the tiny amount of male DNA. As a criminal investigator, without even knowing the murder weapon, the sheath shouldn't have been your priority when you have evidence that another person was bleeding in that home, mixed with two of the victims. There is no reason why that wouldn't be the first place you looked. After the victim's fingernails, of course, to see if any signs were left during a fight, which there was, but again, they didn't belong to Bryan. And on that note, I'll leave you here. In the next episode, I'm going to discuss the multiple people who contacted law enforcement via different means to say they had evidence that Bryan Kohberger was innocent, both from contacting Moscow PD and Pullman PD, that law enforcement, of course, failed to investigate further. We'll also discuss the car that law enforcement were originally looking for, that didn't match Bryan's, but actually matched the vehicle that was seen at the crimes at 4 a.m. that morning by a witness, and at 12 p.m. the next day on the officer's body cam footage. Thanks for tuning in. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe. I do appreciate it. See you next time.